Okay, great. All right, we're going to give folks a few more minutes to come on over here to Zoom, and then we'll get started with reading. Issues. We are not live on the Zoom. Please join us there. If you miss this meeting, I'm recording. So, there we go. Just let folks know what's going on. So we'll wait just a couple of minutes and then we will dive in. But I'm almost wondering if we should reschedule for next week, just because I know quite a few folks missed this, and I don't think everyone is seeing the Zoom. But on the other hand, your time is precious to me, and you came and you saw this, so we'll wait one more minute, and then we're just going to dive in and start reading. And Meredith, do you know me? Had you heard of me before today, just out of curiosity?
No, and I was trying to track down, I've heard of you.
Okay,
And I was
okay.
trying to track down and I follow you, so I
Oh,
must
that's
have found
great.
you some way.
Okay,
But yeah, so happy to be here. And I'm okay rescheduling. I'm okay either way. So
okay.
whatever works. Yeah.
Well, let's see. We've got four of you that made it over. I'm not sure how the other folks are doing, but I want to go ahead and value and honor your time. So I was going to do an introduction, but because we've lost time, we're going to dive right into hush money. And let me just tell you that hush money, how one woman proved systemic racism in her workplace and kept her job. And let me just put this up here for you. Okay, can you see my screen? So Hush Money is a book that I wrote. I was in a very dark place, I'll be honest. When I wrote it, I was at the end. Hi, Leah. Thank you so much for coming over. So I was just explaining that I wrote Hush Money from a very dark place. This was at the end of my career. And if you joined my live event last week, then you know that I was at the point of being so psychologically damaged that I was contemplating homicide and suicide. And so you go to a very dark place when you are experiencing racism in the workplace repeatedly. And so, in order to try to start to heal from that, I took everything that I was feeling and I poured it into Hush Money. It is written very raw. There was no editing on it, and I'm not a writer. It is by the grace of God that 7 months later, Hush Money was a #1 Amazon bestseller. Hi, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm recording this session, so any part that you've missed is going to be available in a recording. I apologize for the technical issues, and I just cannot thank you for showing up today. So Hush Money, after 7 months of selling this book in the trunk of my car, it was an international best-selling and award-winning book, 5-star rated, over 400 reviews. I was featured in Forbes because of the impact that Hush Money was having around the world. I've been featured on ABC News as well as Spectrum News. Because of this journey that I found myself on, I am now a keynote speaker with events that have been sponsored by the NAACP. My biggest client right now is Amazon for talking about our lived experiences in the workplace and helping leaders to understand what we deal with. And I am very excited to also announce that as of recently, Reverend Al Sharpton is reading Hush Money books 1 and 2. So with that being said, I am going to stop sharing and we're going to dive right into Hush Money. Again, for anyone joining us late, I am recording this session, so you'll be able to replay it at a later time. And then I will make sure for the next event where we continue reading that I've figured out all the technical issues with Restream. So one thing that you want to know about Hush Money is that because I have been so successful in taking down racist organizations, I've taken down more than a half a dozen. And so that was important for me to be able to put out a book that really doesn't exist anywhere else. Because if you write a book and you've only taken down one employer and you tell what happened to you, everybody knows who you're talking about. So I had to wait until I had enough successes under my belt before I attempted to explain what's really going on in corporate America, what we are experiencing working while Black, and to do it so that all of the employers that I've worked for over the last, clear almost 20 years would not have any idea which one of them I was talking about. Because when you get hush money, they're paying you these large sums of money to buy your silence. But to guarantee your silence, they're making you sign an NDA or a confidentiality agreement. So to keep myself out of harm's way legally, I did two things. Number one, I waited until I had enough successes under my belt so that, again, no one would know employer-wise which one I was talking about. And number two, I fictionalized my story and inspired it by true events, because the real employer that I am talking about here, and they know who they are, they've actually, some of them have contacted me on LinkedIn, which is just absolutely hysterical. But they know who they are, but they're not going to come forward and tell you who they are, because they know that by them coming forward, I'm not jeopardizing my NDA. You are. And number two, you are adding credibility to me, and my book sales are going to skyrocket. And racists don't want to help you. So they're not going to tell that I'm talking about them and what happened to me in their organization. That's why I was able to start writing my books. And so Hush Money, How One Woman Proved Systemic Racism in Her Workplace and Kept Her Job, is going to take you on a journey of what I call the T's. You're going to feel the trauma that Ebony, the character that I created to share my story, experiences. She's human. You're going to see all the mistakes that she makes along the trials and tribulations of trying to navigate this environment of racism that she's experiencing. You're going to experience the triumph that she gets at the end of the book, because I'm not giving the end of the book away. You know that there was some hush money because that's the title. There was hush money because she was successful in proving what happened to her. And so with that being said, we're going to dive into chapter 1. If we have time, we will get into chapter 2. And I definitely want to make time for you to ask any questions that you may have. So at the end of chapter 1, I'm going to look in the chat to see if there are any questions, and we'll see if we can answer a few of those. If there are questions, I will come back to this recording and make sure I answer every single question that was posed. And if you don't have your mic on mute, if you could mute for me, that would be great. And then we'll go ahead and have you take your mics off of mute towards the end of chapter 1, so we can have a dialogue. So chapter 1 starts with, things were great in the beginning. It was a chilly morning in the city of Austin, Texas, on the day my life was changed. I was sitting at the dining table with Mom, sipping a cup of coffee and browsing the want ads in the newspaper as she read the headline news. Mom, a beautiful woman born in Shreveport, Louisiana, was 51 years old with a taller than average height, a slender physique, caramel colored skin as smooth as silk, and glistening green eyes. She had long, shiny black hair, dressed with a modest elegance, and had a personality that could charm a poisonous snake. Mom adopted me when I was born and named me Ebony to highlight the beauty she saw in my dark skin. And although I didn't look anything like her, she was an amazing parent to me and was great in so many ways. The want ads, on the other hand, were not so great. Jobs that I was qualified for and that also paid well were far and few between. And I was tired of working dead-end jobs that made it hard to make ends meet. As I wadded the want ads into a ball, Mom sensed my frustration, put down her newspaper, and placed her hand on top of mine. "You can stay long as you like, Ebony," she said with love in her eyes. "But don't worry, God has a way of working things out." Mom's words were encouraging, but it was her gentle touch that comforted me the most. And I was at a point in my life where I really needed comforting. At 28 years old, I was going through a divorce, living with Mom in her small one-bedroom apartment, and trying to get my son back from what was supposed to be a summer vacation in New York with his father. As I thanked Mom for her support, the phone rang. It was a call from a woman at the temp agency I had signed up with 2 weeks earlier. "Dave Run Career Institute needs a secretary," she said. "It's a temp position that pays $16.83 an hour, the equivalent of $35,000 a year. Are you interested?" Heck yeah, that's a lot of moolah, I thought to myself before calmly verbalizing my interest. And that's where my story begins, with the call that changed my life in the best way and also the worst way. The call that began my six-figure career in higher education and my descent into racial discrimination hell. When I hung up the phone, I was smiling from ear to ear and couldn't wait to share the good news with Mom. Mom was thrilled. "I told you God has a way of working things out," she said. "All you got to do is believe." The temp assignment wasn't a full-time job and didn't have any real benefits, so you're probably wondering why I was so excited. The reason is really quite simple. For the first time in my life, I had gotten my foot in the door with a company that had real career potential. Dave Run Career Institute was a popular for-profit college with multiple campuses in the state of Texas and multiple campuses, quite frankly, throughout the United States. I had seen Dave Run's commercials on television and even considered enrolling in one of their degree programs. Working in higher education, even as a temp, was a step in the right direction as far as I was concerned. In January 2012, my journey at Dave Run's main campus began in the same city where I lived, and from the very first day, it felt like home. Everything from the environment to the type of work I was doing was amazing. I was in perfect sync with the chancellor, Dr. Hunter Hall, a professional, distinguished-looking man in his 50s who exuded confidence and was as tall as a pro basketball player. He was a handsome man with tanned skin, fashionably styled salt and pepper hair, and an athletic physique. His eyes were greener than an emerald, and there was a warmth and kindness about him that immediately put me at ease. Although Dr. Hall was the most powerful person on campus, he took me under his wing and treated me much like the father figure I'd never had. I developed an instant respect for him and used the computer skills I taught myself at a safe house for abused women to impress him. And impressed he was. He was amazed with my ability to manage budgets, prepare meeting minutes, and develop presentations, and he showed his appreciation every day. I enjoyed my job and planned to work for Dr. Hall and Daybron for many years to come. After working on my temp assignment for 2 months, Dr. Hall called me to his office to meet with him. "You're the best assistant I've ever had," he said with a smile. "I'm the only one that reminds me of a Nubian queen I saw in a movie yesterday." "Thank you," I said with a slight giggle. "It's my braids, isn't it?" I had been styling my hair in dookie braids for the last 2 years because they were easy to do, and I always received so many compliments. "Yes, it's your braids," he said with a warm smile. Then he said he was going to buy out my contract with the temp agency and hire me permanently. "How does senior secretary sound?" he said with a grin. "It comes with a $5,000 raise." "That sounds amazing," I exclaimed as I jumped up and gave him a hug. When I left his office, I was on top of the world and couldn't believe how quickly my hard work had paid off. In a matter of months, I had a full-time job that paid $40,000 a year and came with excellent benefits, including 100% tuition reimbursement. I couldn't wait to tell Mom the good news, so I called her at work. "Mom," I exclaimed, "you'll never guess in a million years what happened." "You win the lotto, child?" "No, something better. Dr. Hall hired me full-time and gave me a $5,000 raise." "I'm so proud of you, honey. God is good. I wish I could talk more, but gotta get back to the machines." I could feel Mom's smile through the phone as she hung up and went back to work. Mom was a machinist and made $11 an hour standing on her feet, operating machines for 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. Standing for that many hours a day would be hard for anyone, but for Mom, it was especially hard because of her age and health issues. Now that I had a permanent job that paid well, my hope was that I could eventually take care of her so she didn't have to work so hard. Shortly after hanging up with Mom, Dr. Hall called me back to his office. "I want you to start managing my income and email," he said. "I'll get too much, and there's not enough hours in the day to respond." The next day, we met with the Director of Information Technology, and Dr. Hall instructed her to provide me with access to his email account so I could manage it in a clandestine way. And even though she expressed concerns about giving me access, she gave it to me anyway. And I began managing Dr. Hall's income and email that day. I felt so important. I was privy to confidential executive level information, making important decisions on Dr. Hall's behalf, and doing my best to ensure that no one suspected that it was me and not Dr. Hall who was in control of his email account. Things were great in the beginning, but then rumors began to spread throughout the campus that it was little old me and not Dr. Hall who was creating the responses coming from his email account. The rumors spread like wildfire and caused such an uproar that within days, dignitaries from Daybron's parent company, Corporate, were at our campus interviewing employees. And when it was my turn to be interviewed, I was terrified. I felt like I was standing in front of a firing squad, both figuratively and literally. "How long have you been pretending to be Dr. Hall?" a man asked. "What else were you doing for Dr. Hall?" another man rudely asked. "Did you knowingly violate our IT security policy?" a woman asked. The questions came from left and right, and although I responded honestly, their stoic demeanor made me feel like Dr. Hall's job wasn't the only one at risk. The corporate reps continued grilling me for about an hour, and I was sweating bullets the whole time. Then I was finally released. And as I walked back to my cubicle, all eyes were on me, and I felt ashamed, even though I didn't think I had done anything wrong. After what seemed like an eternity, corporate emailed an organizational announcement to all staff and faculty stating that Dr. Hall had resigned from his position as chancellor for personal reasons. When I received the email in my inbox, I was crushed because Dr. Hall was the best boss I'd ever had. And as I drove home, I experienced a rainbow of emotions. I was sad Dr. Hall was gone, happy I still had my job, worried about reporting to a new boss, and hopeful my future with Debron would still be bright. 2 weeks later, Mia Kelly, Dr. Hall's replacement as the new chancellor, arrived on campus, and my hopes for a bright future at Debron were instantly dashed. Miss Kelly was the polar opposite of Dr. Hall. She was a statuesque woman in her 40s with cream-colored skin, shoulder-length wavy blonde hair, and vivid blue eyes that could melt the polar ice caps. She was as tall as a runway model, wore fitted dresses with high-heeled strappy sandals, and had a way of looking at me that sent chills down my spine. Perhaps the biggest difference between Dr. Hall and Miss Kelly was that Dr. Hall liked and respected me, and Miss Kelly, on the other hand, despised me and made sure I knew it during our first one-on-one meeting in her office. "Listen, Agony," she said with a low, sultry voice. "Ebony, ma'am," I nervously replied, interrupting her. My name is Ebony." "Okay, Ebony. What are you, 4 feet tall?" "No, I'm 5'4". "Well, that's not tall enough, Agony. Wear higher heels. Towering over you makes my back hurt." I'm a petite woman by nature and was already wearing 2-inch high heels. So the idea that wearing higher heels would keep her from towering over me was laughable. And I did laugh because I thought she was joking. This was a mistake. "Oh, yes, I've heard about you," she said, donning a wide smile as she stared at me. "You're the reason my predecessor is gone." "That's not true," I declared with eyes as big as saucers. "I don't know where this is coming from. Have I done something wrong?" She didn't say a word. She just leaned back in her chair and continued staring at me like I was an alien she wanted to explore. I didn't know what to do or say, so I sat there speechless and awkwardly staring back. After the 2 longest minutes I had ever experienced, she motioned me to leave, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. The next few months were particularly difficult, as Miss Kelly tried to break me like I was a wild horse she was determined and eager to tame. She humiliated me in meetings on a daily basis, degraded and dehumanized me with threats and fear, took away the computer duties I enjoyed, and reduced my job to getting her coffee and running errands. I'll never forget the day Miss Kelly summoned me to her office where she was entertaining visitors from a sister campus. When I walked in, all eyes were locked on me, and I could tell I was the topic of much conversation. "Meet Agony, my poor excuse for a secretary," she said as she flipped her hair back. No one said a word, and the silence in the room was deafening. As everyone stared at me, I was frozen, too humiliated to move or even say what my correct name was. I just stood there like a deer caught in the headlights. "Well, Agony, what are you waiting for?" she asked, raising her eyebrows at me. "Can't you see we need coffee?" At that moment, I found just enough strength to turn around and walk out before bursting into tears. Then I ducked into the bathroom and called Mom. She's trying to break me, I said in between sobs. I don't know how much longer I can last. It breaks my heart to see you hurting, honey, Mom replied. But don't make waves. What did I do to make her hate me so much? You didn't do anything. We've been dealing with this crap our whole lives. She don't want you there because you're Black, but don't quit. Don't lose your good job over this, okay? Mom could tell I was still distraught, so she left me with one final thought to ponder. I know it seems like she's in control, but I promise you, it only seems that way. God's in control, and He knows what you're going through. Mom's reminder about God comforted me. So after hanging up the phone, I asked God to give me strength, then went to the break room to make coffee. Afterwards, I took the cups of fresh coffee to Miss Kelly's office, distributed them to each person, and quickly left. When I returned to my cubicle, I decided to educate myself on workplace harassment because knowledge is power, and I needed to know if there was something I could legally do to make it stop. I did some research and discovered that harassment, according to the EEOC, consists of unwelcome conduct based on a protected class such as race or skin color. It becomes illegal when the conduct is so severe and pervasive that it creates a work environment that is intimidating, hostile, or abusive. Although Ms. Kelly had created a work environment that was intimidating, hostile, and abusive, the majority of her actions, from what I could tell, weren't based on a protected class and therefore were not illegal. And since I couldn't afford to quit my job, I continued reporting to her and suffering in silence for 10 long months. That is, until the day she summoned me to her office for what I knew was to be fired. So, after taking my personal belongings to my car, I went to her office, sat down at her desk, and braced myself for the worst. Agony, she said with a smug look on her face. I hired a new secretary, and since I don't need 2 secretaries, I know I'm fired, I said, interrupting her train of thought. I just don't know what I'm going to tell my son. Son? She asked as her ears perked up. You have a child? Yes, I replied as my eyes filled with tears. I'm trying to save enough money to get him back from New York. I didn't know that. You walk around here acting like everything is rainbows, bubblegum, and unicorns, she said. I don't know if it was the knowledge that I was a mother, struggling financially, or that I had a son that touched Miss Kelly. But as I spoke, the smug look on her face disappeared before my eyes, and her icy heart seemed to thaw a little that day. Then she leaned back in her chair, crossed her toned legs, and sighed. Ebony, you're not fired, she said. We have an opening in the student finance department. If you want to transfer, we'll see how you do. It's a demotion and your salary will be reduced. But if you want it, it's yours. I don't know what shocked me more, that I still had a job or that she finally said my name right. But as I sat there, tears began rolling down my cheeks as I silently cried. When I left her office, I went back to my cubicle and thanked God that I still had my job because I was still making more money than I had made in previous jobs, even with the reduced salary. The next day, I transferred to the student finance department where I was the only Black employee, My annual salary was reduced to $37,000, and my title was changed to Student Finance Advisor. As I sat in my new office and reflected on my first year of employment, I could hardly believe how fast my dream job turned into a nightmare, simply because there was a change in leadership from a great boss to a horrific one. But now that I no longer reported to Miss Kelly, I was confident that there would be nothing but sunshine and blue skies ahead of my career. Or so I thought. Okay, and that's the end of chapter 1. So I'm going to go back to Zoom, and I'm going to see if there were any questions along the way. Okay, so Dory, thank you so much, Dory, for joining us. It's being recorded, so you can definitely watch it later. Okay, perfect. So if I may ask, did you find value in chapter 1? And I'm going to ask everybody to unmute, and we can just kind of talk among ourselves. Was there anything that stood out in chapter 1 for you? Thank you, Meredith. What did you think about Dr. Hall when he complimented Ebony on her braids and said she reminded him of a Nubian princess? Because I'll tell you, Ebony took it as a compliment. You know, she thought he was just being very sweet and nice. But I can see that other people would have been offended by his comment. Is there anyone here that would have been offended by Dr. Hall's compliment of her dookie braids and comparing her to a Nubian princess? Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
It definitely, I mean, I don't know the race of your boss, but it definitely sounds a little bit like fetishization, you know, to me. Or yeah, it definitely feels funky to me.
Yeah, and you know, I can see that now. My older self can see that. At that time, you know, I was just happy that he was being nice to me, and you know, he's my boss, and you know, he likes my braids, and we're getting along well, and he's, you know, taken me under his wing. But as I got older, I was like, I wonder. So I think it's very interesting that you touched on that. So does anyone else have any thoughts? What about having Ebony's name constantly mispronounced by her new boss? Has anyone ever worked for someone who you know they are intentionally mispronouncing your name to get under your skin? Okay. Someone said this is deliberate. So Susama, can you tell us about your comment, this is deliberate? Can you share your insights on that, please?
First, you had said I just wanted to say, you had first asked about the being called the Ebony Princess, I believe.
Yeah, the Nubian princess,
Princess. And when I heard you say it, I had this really creepy vibe feeling, and I realized that that's just, you know, we're not exotic items. And then when you spoke about the next one, who deliberately, you know, it's a deliberate act to mispronounce a name.
Yes.
Or to misname you altogether.
Yes.
So, when you move forward to, she's giving you the job and she finally said your name correctly, it's as if, oh, okay, well, I kind of relate to you, so I think you're kind of human.
Yes.
So use your name today. But
absolutely.
No thanks.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, this is not the first time that I've worked in an organization where they have intentionally called me something different. In fact, It is because in one of the jobs that I actually got, the hush money from, this particular woman kept calling me. You remember when it was popular to use that phrase, bye, Felicia? Remember when everybody was saying that, it was very popular? Well, in this company that I started working in, this particular person, and it wasn't my boss, it was actually a director in a different department, but we met every single morning because our departments had to work together. They enrolled students, and then my department brought in the money to finance the students. And every morning she would tell me, bye, Felicia. Now, I'm the only Black, director that's in these morning meetings. And she's only saying that to me. So as I continue to be in this racist environment, I did some research and I realized, okay, you're comparing me to the crackhead in Friday. Okay. And so I was actually able to tie that to my discrimination complaint. And it was part of the reason that I got my large settlement, because she was saying it in front of everybody. And she thought she was just being cute and funny. But I knew there was an underlying reason. And so when I wrote my discrimination complaint, I actually included a clip from YouTube of that clip on Fridays and then broke it down. And so, these little names and how they're mispronouncing your name and doing these things, they're actually important to you building your case. So if you didn't know that, hopefully now you do. Now, it's 9:47, and I know we got off to a rocky start with the technical issues. Do you want me to continue with chapter 2, which is about 15 minutes long? Yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Excellent, excellent. Thank you, guys. Okay, let's go into chapter 2. So remember, Ebony has been transferred to a different department and she's been demoted. All right, and so chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called From Victim to Outcast. On April 2013, my career as a student finance advisor officially began. Since I had no experience, I was required to complete 1 week of rigorous training on everything there was to know about student finance, and 1 week shadowing other student finance advisors as they met with students during appointments and completed their packaging. Packaging was a fancy word student finance professionals used to refer to the process of awarding financial aid consisting of federal and state grants, federal student loans, scholarships, and other sources of aid to eligible students. It was during the shadowing phase that I realized how inconsistent the appointments were from person to person, and how manual their processes were, especially the process of calculating how much financial aid a student was eligible to receive. Day after day, I shadowed other student finance advisors and watched in horror as they manually calculated everything from the total cost of tuition, books, and fees to the total amount of financial aid each student was eligible to receive. And every time, without fail, they accidentally input the wrong number into the calculator and was forced to redo the calculation. These errors caused the appointment to drag on for way too long and put a bad taste in the mouth of the frustrated student. Determined not to suffer the same fate, I used my computer skills to create an electronic version of the direct cost sheet my teammates were using and added formulas to automate the process. When I used it during my first appointment with the student, instead of the manual cost sheet my teammates were using, it calculated everything correctly within seconds, reduced the appointment time by a whopping 30 minutes, and really impressed my manager, who was observing the appointment. The next day, at my manager's request, I trained everyone in the department on how to utilize the electronic version I created, and it became the standard for calculating eligibility from that day forward. Meeting with students brought me unexpected joy because I realized that many of them were just like me, raised in poverty as children, remained in poverty as adults, and hopeful that earning a degree would improve their circumstances. These commonalities fueled my passion for providing each student with outstanding customer service, and I quickly became a favorite in the student finance department. On any given day, you could hear students in the hallway singing my praises to their friends and recommending me as a point of contact. And it wasn't long before Miss Kelly took notice and decided to capitalize on it. I've scheduled a photo shoot for the campus, and you need to participate, she said with a big smile on her face. Our students love you, and you're basically a celebrity here. The following week, a marketing team came to the campus and took professional photos of me interacting with other staff members selected by Miss Kelly. For many hours that day, I worked with coworkers who pretended to be students in various scenarios, and it was a fun experience. A week later, Miss Kelly took out ads containing photos of me in the local magazine and even scheduled interviews of me with the magazine's reporters. I have to admit, I loved the attention I was getting, even though Miss Kelly really pushed the Black factor. Miss Kelly paid extra to expedite things, and 2 weeks later, there were photos of me in the school catalog, on free promotional swag, and on posters hanging in the hallways. My face was everywhere. And because of my interviews in the local magazine, Daybron saw an increase in minority enrollments. I can't be sure what the motivating factor was, but a few weeks later, Miss Kelly transferred LaToya Johnson to the student finance department and told me to personally train her. LaToya was a pregnant woman in her 20s with an average height, mahogany skin she slathered with cocoa butter to prevent stretch marks, and hypnotic gray eyes she said came from her mother. She had chestnut brown hair that flowed down her back, a larger-than-life personality, and a reputation for being ghetto fabulous. Are you the trainer for our department or something? LaToya asked as she rubbed a mountain of cocoa butter on her arms. Girl, I don't mean to be rude, but some of these folks said you're just as new as I am. So isn't that like the blind leading the blind? Miss Kelly told me to train you, I replied. That's all I know. Enough said. Although our personalities were quite different, we had 3 things in common. We were both Christians, we were both hard workers, and we were both Black. Our commonalities made working together easy, and I was happy to no longer be the only Black person on the team. Over the next 2 years, I used my computer skills to help my manager improve operations, identify past due cash, develop a strategy to complete packages timely, and create a presentation to standardize the information that was communicated to students. Because of my hard work and effort, I became an informal team lead, and my career was finally back on track. That is, until February 2015, when Miss Kelly demoted my manager and hired a man by the name of Malcolm Webb as the Associate Director of Student Finance. Malcolm was a professionally laid-back man in his 30s, with ivory skin, a stocky build, and shorter-length brown hair slicked back into a low ponytail. He had hazel eyes, wore gold stud earrings in both ears, and had a blinding smile with the whitest teeth I had honestly ever seen. On his first day as our new supervisor, Malcolm called a team meeting in the conference room and asked everyone to introduce themselves one at a time. One by one, each person stated their name, how long they had been working for Daybron, and one fun fact. When it was my turn to speak, I said, "My name is Ebony. I've been working at Daybron for almost 3 years, and I like playing scary video games." "I like your name, Ebony." Malcolm said with a smile and a deep, raspy voice. It suits you well. Thank you. I think so too. I'm also intrigued by the way you speak. How did you learn to speak so articulately? When I was 7 years old, I watched TV for hours with my mom, everything from reporters on the news to primetime soap operas after I finished my homework. Then I pretended to be the characters I saw as I played with Mom. For years, I thought we were just playing a fun game. But when I got older, I realized Mom used the characters on TV to teach me how to effectively communicate. Wow, that's an amazing story. Thanks for sharing. Malcolm seemed like a nice man and was a seasoned student finance professional with many years of experience under his belt. And initially, I was excited to learn under his leadership. It became apparent very quickly, though, that he didn't share my enthusiasm. Right from the start, LaToya and I noticed that Malcolm treated us differently than others in our department. It started out with small things like excluding us from lunch gatherings and offering snacks to everyone except us. But then he started holding team meetings without us and requiring us to constantly work the late shift while everyone else went home on time. One day, I poked my head into his office where he was working at his desk. "Do you have a moment?" I politely asked. "Not really," he replied, avoiding eye contact with me. "What do you need?" "I was wondering if it's possible to have team meetings that include everyone so we can all be on the same page," I said. "LaToya and I feel like we're missing important information being shared with others." "You don't say," he said with a chuckle. "Here's the thing, Ebony. If there's something I feel you need to know, I'll be the first one to tell you. Anything else?" "No, that was it." There was an awkward silence for several seconds as he stared at me, and I stared back at him. Disappointed, I turned and walked away, and I could feel his hazel eyes burning a hole in the back of my head until I exited his office. Afterwards, I pulled LaToya aside and told her what happened. "He's obviously a racist," I said. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Maybe he got issues with you questioning his authority, and I don't want no part of whatever's going on in that head of yours." I could tell I was making LaToya nervous and didn't want to press the issue or alienate her in any way. So I dropped it and we both went back to work. But try as I might, I couldn't get my concerns about Malcolm being a racist out of my mind for the rest of the day and, quite frankly, most of the night. The next morning, I pulled LaToya aside again. "Toy, he's discriminating against us, plain and simple, and it's going to get worse if we don't do something. Do you think we should complain to Miss Kelly?" "Oh, hell no," LaToya exclaimed, all fired up. "That's a great way to get fired, and ain't nobody got time for that. Complaining is white people shit. And anyway, we don't have no proof." "But we do have proof," I said passionately. "He's openly treating us different. Anyone who..." "Stop, girl, damn," LaToya said, forcefully interrupting me. "Even if he is discriminating against us, at least we still have jobs. Miss Kelly will fire us both if we complain." I paused for a moment to collect my thoughts because I knew she was right. Then I calmly explained that I read our anti-discrimination policy, and it said employees can report discrimination anonymously by calling corporate's confidential hotline and leaving a message. According to the policy, once it's reported, corporate will conduct an investigation, and Ms. Kelly will never know who submitted the complaint because the information will be kept strictly confidential. After thinking about it for a minute, LaToya nodded her head and sighed. "Okay, girl, this could work, but I ain't making a call," she said. "No worries. I replied. I'll make the call tonight. When I got home, Mom was sitting at the dining table, mixing a cup of baking soda water. Hey, honey, how was your day? She asked, looking at me with dark circles under her eyes and sounding a little tired. Long. I'm glad to be home. You feeling okay, Mom? I'm constipated and my stomach's upset. Must have ate something bad. Then Mom chugged the baking soda water down, kissed me on the forehead, and went off to bed. I wasn't planning to keep Mom in the dark about what I intended to do, but decided at the last minute not to tell her. It would only make her worry, and she needed to rest. So, after verifying that Mom was asleep, I made the phone call to the anonymous hotline using my best fake accent to disguise my voice. I'm an employee at the main campus. I'd like to file a complaint against Malcolm Webb, the Associate Director of Student Finance. He's discriminating against his Negroes. He's excluding them Negro folks from meetings and lunches, sharing his snacks with everyone else, and forcing them to work late while everyone else gets to leave on time. I hope y'all will investigate. As I hung up the phone, I felt good knowing I had done the right thing and confident that all would be well. Now, hindsight is 2020. And looking back, reporting discrimination anonymously was absolutely the wrong thing to do, because corporate didn't conduct the investigation themselves like the policy said they would. Instead, they notified Ms. Kelly that an anonymous discrimination complaint was received and instructed her to investigate it. And since it was more important to her to find out who the rat was than to actually conduct an investigation, she used the process of elimination to flush out the guilty party. She started with LaToya. My heart raced as I watched Miss Kelly go into LaToya's office and walk away with her in tow. About 25 minutes later, LaToya walked back to her office with Miss Kelly following close behind her. And when her teary eyes met mine as I intensely watched from my office, she mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." When I read her lips, my heart sank into my stomach and I felt violently ill. Then Miss Kelly went into Malcolm's office and closed the door behind her. For the next 20 minutes, I sat in my office on the verge of vomiting and wishing I was a fly on the wall in Malcolm's office. When Miss Kelly finally came out, she made her way to my desk. And if looks could kill, I would have been dead in my chair. "Ebony, a word," she said with a low growl as she turned and walked away. I slowly stood up and began following her, and as I walked, there was no doubt in my mind. I was in deep, deep trouble. When we arrived at Miss Kelly's office and walked in, she closed the door behind us and tore into me like a rabid dog before I even had a chance to sit down. "After everything I've done for you, after everything I gave you, you air our dirty laundry to corporate? I made you a celebrity. I gave you a career, and this is how you repay me? I should have fired you when I had a chance." "I'm sorry, Miss Kelly," I replied as my eyes welled up with tears. "Oh, you're sorry, all right," she snarled. "Sorriest excuse for an employee I've ever seen. And you've committed career suicide, so you think about that and get out of my office." Tears flowed freely from my eyes as I left her office and began the long walk of shame back to mine. And as I got closer to the student finance department, I saw Malcolm standing in the entryway, and grinning at me like an evil clown. I was emotionally exhausted after the verbal beating I took from Miss Kelly. So I scurried past him, went into my office and closed the door, and breathed a sigh of relief because I still had my job and hoped everything would blow over and return to normal in a few days. When I arrived at work the next day, I realized that everything was not going to blow over and return to normal anytime soon. Malcolm was furious when Miss Kelly informed him that I made the anonymous phone call to corporate. So he retaliated against me. He reviewed my completed work and riddled it with errors, making it appear that I was incompetent and putting my job at risk, verbally abused me in front of coworkers, called me darky in private, and made me work more late shifts than anyone else. And since he knew my sister was now a student at Daybron, he tampered with her financial aid, which caused a delay in the additional student loan funds she had borrowed to help Mom catch up on her car payments, which delayed the stipend check she was supposed to receive and resulted in Mom's car being repossessed. Things with Malcolm were so bad that I dreaded coming to work, afraid of the new attacks each day would bring. My job became a living nightmare from which I could not awake, gave me an enormous amount of anxiety, and resulted in 40 pounds of weight gain over a 3-month period due to stress. One afternoon, Malcolm stopped by my office unexpectedly and closed the door. "My, how the mighty have fallen," he said with a light-hearted chuckle. "The posters of you were pulled down a few minutes ago, and your face is being removed from all marketing material as we speak. So guess what? No more celebrity Ebony." Then he shrugged his shoulders and cheerfully said, "Oh well, ready to quit yet, Darky?" I didn't say a word. I just stared at my computer screen and feverishly typed while he stood in front of my desk glaring at me in a way that gave me the creeps. He glared at me for about a minute and then out of nowhere busted out laughing. He laughed so hard he almost choked on his own spit. As he stood in front of my desk pointing at me and laughing, I wanted to cry, but managed to hold the tears back long enough for him to get the hell out of my office. Then I cried. I felt so alone, and there was no one I could turn to for help because Miss Kelly retaliated against me too. She spread vicious rumors about me across the campus and labeled me as the girl who cried racism. And because she was the chancellor and her words carried a huge amount of weight, she transformed me from the racial discrimination victim that I was into a social outcast, and no one, not even LaToya, wanted to talk to me, let alone be seen with me. And I didn't dare file another discrimination complaint. I was too afraid of being fired or making matters worse. As I sat at my desk crying, I knew it was just a matter of time before Malcolm unjustly fired me, or I buckled under the pressure of his hate and resigned. I also knew that no matter which method brought about the loss of my job, the end result would still be the same. Without my job, I would go spiraling back into poverty, and the thought terrified me. As I continued worrying about my job, my mind began to wander, and I started having dark thoughts, very dark thoughts, about Malcolm and what I would do if I ever saw him alone in a dark alley with no cameras and no witnesses. I'd do my best to beat the living shit out of him, stab him a few times with a butcher knife, then force feed him my shit until he gagged and begged for mercy. And if he tried to crawl away as he bled, I'd pull out my gun and shoot him. Yeah, just shoot him. Or should I stab him again? Stab him or shoot him? Shoot him or stab him? Stab him or shoot him? For the next 15 minutes, I sat at my desk smiling, blankly staring at the wall as I embraced the darkness and imagined all the ways I would hurt and kill Malcolm. Suddenly, the phone on my desk rang, snapping me back to reality. I was alarmed by my desires, especially because I began to understand the conditions that cause good people to snap, hunt down, and kill their bosses, along with anyone else who gets in the way. So I quickly grabbed my keys and purse and left the place fostering my evil thoughts. And as I drove out of the parking lot and reflected back on the last 3 years of my employment, I assured myself that there was a light at the end of the dark tunnel, even though I couldn't see it yet. And it wasn't a freight train coming to run me down. Or so I thought. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 2. And again, for anyone who joined us late, I've been recording the chapters as I'm reading them. Whew. I'll be honest. It's hard for me. I am getting better though. I can pull it together fast and keep reading, but it does tear at my heart when I look at what I went through. So a couple of questions. Ebony was demoted, okay, by Miss Kelly and put into a different department where she didn't know anything. Has anyone worked for a racist boss and found themselves being demoted out of their position, even though they knew they were qualified? Okay, I see some head nods, okay. This is a tactic that they do with us. This is how racism in the workplace works. Thank you, guys. Thank you. It's actually therapeutic for me to share my stories, honestly. I was on the verge of committing homicide and suicide by the end. And so actually talking, having someone willing to listen, and not only listen, but validate their experiences with what I went through has helped me get to the point that I'm at today, where I can talk about what I went through, help people understand what we experience, and hopefully help people fight back and either get their settlements or stop the nonsense that's happening to them. So I thank you for listening to me and giving me an ear. I also wanted to know, has anybody ever suspected that your boss was changing your work or making it appear like you were making errors when you knew you weren't? Okay, that's another tactic. And so as you progress through the story and we start learning how Ebony fought back and won, these are things you want to keep in mind because these are tactics, okay? Now, has anyone ever had a boss who intentionally made you feel excluded? So with Ebony, you know, the boss would bring in a box of donuts, but instead of putting it out in the general area, he would take them into his office and then call certain ones to come in and enjoy what he brought. And he would never call Ebony and her coworker. Has anyone ever felt, now that's not covert, that's overt. He's being obviously racist. He's making it known in that situation. But have you ever felt like your boss was intentionally and openly excluding you from something, whether it was the snacks in his office that he's not inviting you in to enjoy? Someone said, I had a boss who would misrepresent my work to his boss. Absolutely. Or take credit for your work, because that's the other thing that happens. As you'll see, you are doing a great job. Your boss wants to review and approve your work, okay? So you're giving them your information and they're misrepresenting it to their boss as theirs. Okay, that's another tactic. So can we take our mics off? Because I like to hear folks. This really just helps me. So I'm going to ask everyone to unmute. And if you would, please just tell me if you found value in the first 2 chapters. And would you like to continue next week with the next 2 chapters? Because I'm willing to read my entire book to you so that you can experience it the way that I felt it. Was this valuable to you today? And please just shout out and talk to me.
Yes,
Yes,
Jackie.
absolutely.
Okay, great. Here's what I need you to do for me. I teach people how to fight. I actually work one-on-one with Black folks who contact me in a panic saying, this is what's happening. I'm like the on-call doctor. I get messages all times, a day and night. And we do have people who are successful. I've helped people get their jobs back. I've helped people get their 6-figure settlements. And I just met with a woman in France who just got her settlement, who said she did absolutely everything down to the letter. And so she has offered to interpret hush money into French for me. So it is amazing how many people are learning. And I don't really charge for these live events because it's important to me to empower not just Black folks, but I want white folks to understand this is what's happening so you can see it. You know what to look for. You can see the covert side that you really can't see. And so then you will know how to be the best ally, the best abolitionist, the best accomplice. But here's what I need everyone to do for me. I am terrified to go back into corporate America, and I absolutely never will. That's a guarantee and a promise. So I need you to do 2 things for me if you haven't already. I need you to buy both Hush Money books, Hush Money 1 and the sequel, because together they lay out a strategy that is going to teach you how to fight back. That's how you can support me. So instead of charging lots of money, all I ask you to do is invest $15 per book in me. It's about $15 each. Invest in me and I will invest in you and empower you and be there for you when you need me. That's number 1. Number 2, at the end of us reading these books, I need a review from Amazon because I'm self-published. I'm doing everything on my own. I am a one-woman band. And so I need those reviews because people don't read self-published books without the reviews, and the racists are putting bad ratings on my books right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they found me. And number 3, if you cannot afford to buy Hush Money at $15 each, message me and I will reach out and see if there is a kind person who is willing to sponsor a book for you so that you can have it because you really do want it. It's going to be your guide to fighting back. And if you have any questions about the 2 chapters we read today, go ahead and either type them in the chat here or you can message me and I promise to give you an answer. And then the event is already scheduled for next week. Before you leave, please go to that event and register. And then I'm going to contact Restream to see what happened today and make sure that that doesn't happen next week, okay? And I just can't thank you enough for finding value in me and my experiences. I'm sending you all so much love, and I just cannot thank you enough. So please come back next week, and we will go into the next 2 chapters of Book 1, Hush Money.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.